You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in 1 Kings 2. David dies, and Solomon's kingdom is established. 1 Kings 2 records a major transition in Israel's history. David's long and eventful reign comes to an end, and Solomon begins exercising his authority as king. The chapter includes David's final instructions, his death, Solomon's dealings with several men who had threatened the stability of the kingdom, and the fulfillment of promises and judgments that had been waiting for years. Some portions of this chapter can seem admittedly severe, but these passages emphasize an important truth. God's chosen king will reign, and opposition to his kingdom will ultimately be dealt with. As David realizes that his death is approaching, he gives Solomon instructions about how to live and how to rule. He tells him this in verses 2 and 3. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies. David understands that Solomon's success won't ultimately depend on political skill, military strength, or personal charisma. Solomon needs to walk faithfully with God. David reminds him of God's promise that if his descendants remain faithful, David won't lack a man on Israel's throne. And this promise is especially significant because it reaches beyond Solomon. God had promised David that his dynasty would have an enduring future. Solomon would continue that royal line, but he wouldn't be its final fulfillment. The ultimate son of David would be Jesus Christ. David also gives Solomon instructions concerning several individuals. Joab had been David's military commander, but he shed innocent blood by murdering Abner and Amasa. David tells Solomon not to allow Joab's guilt to go unanswered. At the same time, he instructs Solomon to show kindness to the sons of Barzillai because Barzillai had supported David during Absalom's rebellion. David also warned Solomon about Shimei, who had cursed David when he fled Jerusalem. And then David dies. Verses 10 and 11 say this, Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. David had been a shepherd, warrior, fugitive, king, worshiper, sinner, and recipient of extraordinary grace. But even Israel's greatest king couldn't escape death. His reign ended, and another king had to take his place. Verse 12 says, So Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. Now, almost immediately, Solomon faces a challenge involving Adonijah. Back in chapter 1, Adonijah attempted to make himself king, and Solomon spared his life on the condition that he prove himself worthy. But Adonijah now asks Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, to request that Solomon give him Abishag the Shunammite as his wife. In chapter 1, we're told more about Abishag. She was a beautiful young virgin woman who was chosen to lay beside David to help keep him warm in his old age. We're also specifically told that David was not intimate with her. Now, to some readers, Adonijah's request to marry Abishag might seem harmless. In the ancient royal context, however, possessing a former king's woman could carry political significance and could imply a claim to the throne. And Solomon recognizes the request for what it is. Adonijah hasn't truly abandoned his political ambitions. So Solomon orders Benaiah to execute Adonijah. The king then addresses somebody else. He removes Abiathar from the priesthood. Abiathar had supported Adonijah's attempt to seize the throne, but Solomon spares his life because he had carried the ark and he had suffered alongside David. And his removal also fulfills the earlier judgment God had pronounced against the house of Eli. Joab realizes at this point that his judgment is coming next, and he runs to the tent of the Lord, and he takes hold of the horns of the altar, apparently hoping to find protection there. But the altar wasn't intended to provide permanent sanctuary for an unrepentant murderer. Solomon commands Benaiah to execute Joab, bringing judgment for the blood Joab had previously shed. Benaiah then becomes commander of the army, and Zadok replaces Abiathar as priest. Finally, Solomon deals with Shimei. Rather than executing him immediately, Solomon establishes clear boundaries. Shimei must remain in Jerusalem, and Solomon warns him in verse 37, "For on the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you shall die." And Shimei agrees, and for 3 years he obeys. But when 2 of his servants flee, he leaves Jerusalem to retrieve them. And when Solomon learns what happened, Shimei is brought before the king. He had knowingly violated the terms under which his life had been spared, and judgment follows. The chapter then ends with an important statement. In verse 46 we read, "So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon." That sentence summarizes this chapter. Solomon's throne had been challenged, but by the end of 1 Kings chapter 2, those challenges had been removed. God's chosen king was firmly established. And yet Solomon's kingdom still points us towards something greater. Solomon inherited David's throne, but Jesus is the ultimate son of David. The angel Gabriel told Mary that God would give Jesus the throne of his father David, and that of his kingdom there will be no end. We see that in Luke chapter 1. Solomon's reign lasted for a season, but Jesus reigns forever. There's also a major contrast between Solomon and Jesus. It could be said that Solomon established his kingdom partly by executing those who rebelled against his authority. But Jesus established his kingdom by allowing rebels to execute him. At the cross, the rightful king took the judgment his enemies deserved. Jesus didn't die because his kingdom had failed. His death was part of the way his kingdom would triumph. He bore sin. He satisfied divine justice. He rose from the grave. And now he offers forgiveness to everyone who turns to him in faith. But grace doesn't mean rebellion will continue forever. 1 Kings 2 reminds us that opposition to God's king eventually faces judgment. The same is true of Christ's kingdom. Jesus presently offers mercy freely, but Scripture also promises that he'll return as the righteous judge, and he'll establish his rule completely. David died. Solomon eventually died too. Every earthly ruler's reign comes to an end, but Jesus is different. Jesus died, but he rose again, and he'll never surrender his throne to a successor. His enemies won't overthrow him, and his kingdom won't collapse. The kingdom that was temporarily established in Solomon's hand has its eternal fulfillment in Jesus Christ, the greater Son of David, and the King whose reign will never end. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.